Welcome to the Veterans Day presentation. I'm Kara Bennett.
And I'm James Malcolm. We are live from the Carroll High School TV studio with an opportunity to speak with 3 veterans about their experiences and memories while in service to their country.
First, we'd like to introduce our guests. Starting close to me is Staff Sergeant Scott Royer, who is currently serving with the Army National Guard.
In the middle is Sergeant E5 Ronald Wiss, who served in the Army during the Vietnam War.
And our final guest on the end, First Sergeant Ron Holmes, who served with the Marines during the Vietnam War as well. And we'll start our first question with you, Mr. Holmes. Please tell us a little bit about your background and the circumstances that led you to join the military.
Yes, when I graduated from high school, I knew I wasn't quite ready for college, and I thought I'd get my military obligation out of the way and then look forward to a college education. And so after 26 years in the Marine Corps, I finally got my military obligation out of the way.
How about for you, Mr. Wiss?
I am a local, I'm here locally, went to high school and here locally, and then went to out to IPFW, and a little bit like Ron here, I went to school for a while and then couldn't really decide what I was going to do. And I quit school, and they found me and drafted me, and so I didn't exactly join, I got joined. But so my perspective might be a little bit different because I was not a volunteer, I was drafted. So
right.
That's my experience.
Okay. You?
For me, I'm a cavalry scout, 15152 out of Connorsville. I was in Bluffton. I was out for almost 10 years, and then 9/11 happened, and took me a couple of years to get some traction. My kids were born, and I decided, you know, there's guys overseas getting hurt, injured, I can still do something. So I re-enlisted, and I've been back for almost 9 years.
Starting with you, Scott, how many tours did you serve, and where did you go on those tours?
I served 1 year in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. That was 2008, and before that, I was mobilized for Hurricane Katrina, 2005.
Gotcha. Mr. Wiss?
Well, I was drafted in 1968, and I went to Vietnam in '69, and a little bit of '70. I was actually over there a little more than the normal year tour, and was all over Vietnam except in the northern parts, mostly south, southeast, and I think into Cambodia a few times. It probably shouldn't have been, but that's the area that I was at in Vietnam. I just did 1 tour.
And finally, Mr. Holmes?
Yes, I did 3 tours in Vietnam. Vietnam was divided up into corps, I Corps, Second Corps, Third Corps, and I Corps was the northern region where most of the Marines operated.
Okay. All right, and starting with you, Mr. Royer, what kind of things did you do on a daily basis?
Besides avoiding the sun and the sand and the heat of Iraq, we'd prep our vehicles, get ready for the next mission. We're always praying for another mission because it got kind of crazy when you're on the base. That's when you'd get attacked with the mortars and the rockets, and at least if you're outside the wire, you're a moving target. We'd train on what-if scenarios if a vehicle gets hit or somebody gets hurt, so when we knew what to do once we got outside the wire.
Okay. For you, Mr. Wiss?
Well, I was in the field almost the entire time I was in Vietnam, which was essentially a combat situation. We ran what they called RIFs, which were reconnaissance and force, and we went out every day and just kind of cleared areas, and we worked out of a base camp, but many times from that base camp, we would be out in the field. We dug in every night and did, like I said, reconnaissance and force on a daily basis.
Okay. So for you?
And I think it differed from day to day based upon what the mission was for that day. If you were in the rear that day, it was sort of a relaxation. If you were preparing to go out, obviously that was a little bit different. And if you were out, obviously that was a whole lot different.
Scott, how did it feel being so far from home with all your family here and everything?
It's kind of funny because at first, you're away from home, obviously you're missing everything, you're missing the conveniences that we have as Americans. But once you're there for a while, you start missing it less because it sounds kind of strange because you're loving the guys you're with. They become your surrogate family. And I got to come home on leave, and after 9 months I was sick of seeing those guys day in, day out. Well, I got home, I was home for a day, and I was like, man, I really miss them guys.
Gotcha.
They become your family at some point.
And Mr. Holmes, you said you came out of college. Did you have any family that you missed when you went overseas?
Yes, by that time I had gotten married, and I had a wife and a young son. But I had been in the Marine Corps for some time, so homesickness wasn't something that I was experiencing a lot. My concern was survival and to be able to do my job.
And same with you, Mr. Wiss?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Scott said a little bit. It's a little different. I mean, Vietnam is an ugly place to be. I mean, it was a nasty place to be. But you've got a bunch of young men just like you doing the exact same thing, and it's kind of odd that you could be in sometimes so much danger, and yet you didn't really think about it so much because everybody was in the same boat and they were all young. I think it's a little different today. The soldiers that are joining are a little older and a little less naive than we were. But I had a family at home, but I was not married or had no children, just my folks and my brothers and sisters. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and to reemphasize something he said, the average age of the servicemen in Vietnam was 19 years old. And so that a lot of things that happened because of immaturity.
Starting with you again, Scott, could you describe what the conditions were like during your service throughout the day and night?
The sandstorms were interesting. You know, you see in the movies like The Mummy, the big rolling.
Yeah.
I never seen that when I was over there. Iraq's on the edge of a main desert, Baghdad area. Basically, you'd see look like a fog bank, but it was brown.
Right.
And next thing you know, you couldn't see this far in front of your face.
Wow.
And that would last anywhere from a couple hours up to a couple days. And add that in. If you want to know what the experience is, turn your oven on to about 400 degrees, get a hairdryer, and throw sand in your face. That's what it is. Sand gets everywhere. Equipment, yourself. Hot, 120 degrees plus during the day. Night, it gets down to 80, but it feels like it's about 40 because of that main temperature drop. As far as living conditions, we actually had it pretty good compared to guys before us. We actually had a room with air conditioning that worked most of the time. We most of the time had decent food in the chow halls. The biggest thing was outside the wire when we didn't have parts for our vehicles, run low on equipment. We just have to make things up as we go and sometimes commandeer some stuff once in a while.
How about for you, Mr. Wiss? What are the conditions?
Well, the weather, to take what Scott said, only add rain to it every once in a while. And it's sort of got Vietnam. It's hot. Different portions of it are a little different. I was happened to be in a situation where I was in it all of the time, so we dug in every night. We were awake an hour, we slept an hour every night, and once we had a period when we were along the Saigon River. And the Saigon River, when the tide goes up, the river backs up, and we didn't know that, so we slept in water all night with just our heads out of the ground. So not a pleasant place.
It's not like back here where you have 4 seasons. Vietnam had 2 seasons. One season was rainy and the other season was hot.
Starting with you, Scott, in Iraq, how did the people treat you when you went over there? How did the civilians act?
Most of the time, they're really no different than the average American. They just want to raise their kids and their families, go to work, and be left alone. They were real good with us. We ran into quite a few of the Iraqi police, Iraqi army. We would give them some of our leftover meals because even in 2008, they weren't getting paid on a regular basis. They didn't have regular chow holes. Their conditions were 10 times worse than us. So we'd give stuff to them here and there, and they would be so thankful. The guys we did give stuff to would actually warn us of dangers. They're like, hey, yeah, but the other units that treated them poorly would almost always get hit by an ambush or rocket attacks or something within pretty close proximity to where they're stationed at. I'm like, that's kind of funny because if you treat people decent, they treat you back decent. Yeah. And that's where most of the Iraqis are that way.
Understandable. And in Vietnam, Ron, how did the Vietnamese treat you?
I had almost no contact with the locals. I was in the field most of the time, but most of the time we were not allowed to go into villages, and most people didn't come out to where we were. I had almost none, and I always thought people asked me about if I knew what was going on. We actually knew nothing that was going on. We just didn't. I mean, you at home, not you, you're too young, but the folks at home knew way more about what was going on in Vietnam than we did. We just knew what was in our little piece of real estate.
And Mr. Holmes, did you have any experience with the civilians?
Some. We were told to stay away from the locals because you didn't know who the good guys were, who the bad guys were. And so the best thing to do is just stay away from the locals as much as you possibly could.
Well, starting with you, Scott, again. When you returned back to the States, did you feel that you had more of a respect from people? How was that?
Well, I think first of all, I got to thank the Vietnam veterans. They did so much for the soldiers of Iraq and Afghanistan. I know the way they were treated most of them were treated when they came home was really bad. And because they decided we will not let that happen to any other soldiers again. When I come home, I had people, congratulating me, thanking me. Every once in a while when I'm in uniform, even today, we'll still get people, hey, I'm going to buy you a tank of gas. I'm at the gas station. They'll pay for my gas before I even get in there. Or buy me a pop or pay for my family's dinner. The overall reception, and I think that is due mostly to the Vietnam and Korea era guys that really took a beating. The treatment's been great. It felt great to come home.
For you, Mr. West, was it a little bit different coming home?
It was a little bit different. I mean, no war is popular, but the general public didn't really give the backing to the soldiers at that time, and there was a lot of stories and misconceptions about what happened. And so I can't say that you hear the stories about people spitting on people and those guys. And I didn't have anything like that. People were just sort of indifferent to me. No one really asked me. No one really cared about that kind of thing. The other thing I do want to say this in Scott's behalf, I appreciate what he said, but I am absolutely happy that we didn't have to go back 2 or 3 times. I think that's the biggest crime in the military today, that these guys have to keep going back to Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't know if I'd have went back to Vietnam, I got to tell you.
For you?
My experiences wasn't that bad when I came home. I had family support. I came home for 30 days and then moved to a new duty station. And so I didn't have a whole lot of bad experiences with that. My family was great. They were happy to see me, and I was happy to see them. And then by that time, I moved to a new duty station, and they moved with me. So I know about bad experiences, but I didn't have a lot of bad experiences.
Okay.
Starting with you, Mr. Holmes. When you came back, you transitioned from Vietnam to U.S. life. How was that transition?
It wasn't that difficult. Okay, I hear about people. I never had flashbacks. The only time I had flashbacks was when it was time to cut the grass, and I told my wife I couldn't cut the grass because I was having a flashback. But she soon caught on to that, and that didn't work any longer. But it really wasn't that difficult. Coming back, obviously there were some things in Vietnam that we were allowed to do, but I also understood once we got back in the States that we had to clean up our act, and there were things that we were not going to be allowed to do in the States that we were allowed to get away with in Vietnam.
Was it the same with you, Mr. West?
A little bit different for me. I was in kind of an unusual situation. They had a program when I was in Vietnam that if you had less than 151 days left to serve in your 2-year service, and you were in Vietnam, you could just go home. You didn't have to serve that last 151 days. And I had a little delay before I went to Vietnam, so I stayed over. I was in a relatively safe condition, and I stayed over an extra month or so I could fall within that. But I went from the field of Vietnam to California, and I was home in like 72 hours. So I went from the jungle to home. So it was a little bit different. I didn't have that transition in the state. But like I said, I had a lot of family support too. But there was just like it was like the elephant in the room for a little while. No one knew what to say to you or how to act to you. But it goes away.
And you, Scott?
Kind of the same. It's a little different being a National Guard soldier because you spend a lot of time in the civilian world to begin with, but you've got a military obligation. Once I was mobilized, it's like all bets are off the civilian world. It's time to kick in high gear. Coming back, my family was great. I've got a great support network of family and church and schools, and that made it easier. But sometimes, for the first 6 months, I couldn't watch the local news because it just irritated me. A lot of the time, you felt like people weren't quite getting it. Then that starts going away a little bit, and you're like, no, this is the reason I serve, because people are exercising their freedoms, and you are free to be as ignorant as you want, or as smart as you want. But being National Guard, like I said, there's a few little differences. They're great at transitioning soldiers now, so they get used to being at home. You know, the backfire of a car can sometimes mess with you. My first 4th of July back, I was taking a nap around 4th of July, and neighbors started setting off bottle rockets. And I did a combat roll off my bed and got up. My wife asked me, "Did you fall off the bed?" I said, "Yeah." And if it's one of those, for me, I do have PTSD, but it's manageable. It's just learning how to manage it and realize, hey, you're back here doing your job.
Right. Could you explain what PTSD is?
Post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that can be brought on not just military, any traumatic incident. If you're a kid up to an adult, combat, walking down the street. Mine it got so bad, we were so desensitized in Iraq because the base I was on would get mortar attacked. Explosive rounds come in almost daily. Its nickname was Mortaritaville. And I actually got to the point about halfway through my deployment that I could count the incoming rounds like sheep, and I'd fall asleep. Usually by about the 4th impact, I'd be asleep. And then just wake up the next morning and look around, yep, my building's still here, it didn't get blown up. And that made the transition a little strange, because just the thumps and the booms when you got little kids around a house that have hardwood floors, like to jump. That makes it a little interesting. But I said, it's the National Guard has a great system set up now for helping soldiers, helping us transition back and get back to civilian life and being, average Americans.
Sure. Would you possibly be able to describe what men and women are going through right now in the Middle East?
I think, for the most part, they're happy that we're starting to draw down. A little disappointed because I don't think the job's totally done. I've lost some friends over there. I lost some friends due to injury once they got back here. They'd committed suicide. A lot of it, they just want to know America's got their back. They want to know our politicians are not apologizing for them. They're letting us do our jobs. A lot of the times you'll see, especially with an election yesterday, you'll see that the politicians will sell us short. They'll apologize for Americans or whatever. That doesn't make the military any safer. We need to take a strong stance, and the soldiers know that. But they know once their job's done, they've got some place to come back to, and the American people are going to love them. So, that's their biggest thing is not what they're dealing with over there. It's what they're going to deal with when they come back here. And they know they want jobs, they want good stuff, and it's going to be here for them.
Your thoughts on that, Mr. Riss?
I don't. Scott is obviously the expert on that, having been there time ago. But I think that some of the things correspond to Vietnam. When I was in Vietnam, probably my particular case, this was on everybody's case, we were probably we probably lost more people from booby traps and those kinds of things than we did from actual combat. And I know there's a lot of that over there. And living in that kind of a situation where you're going down there and you don't know, it's got to be really draining. I think the people that are over there are a little older and have a little bit more support because most of them have wives and children and family, and they're a little bit, they're more educated, and so I have to defer to Scott on that. But I think some of it was kind of corresponded with my experience in Vietnam. But it's a miserable place, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
I think we all had RTD dates, which is rotation tour dates, so we knew we're going to be here for this amount of time, and we were going to go back unless you went back early for some unaccountable reason. And we knew how long we were going to be back in the States before we became eligible to go back. And I had very few friends who were back here, and I read a lot of times the amount of time that before they rotate back, and that's hard for me to understand why they're rotating back so soon. And to me, that was the biggest difference. I knew how long I was going to be there. I knew how long I was going to be in the States before I became eligible to go back. And their amount of time in the States seems really, really minimal before it's time for them to go back. And probably that would be the hardest thing to deal with.
And staying with you, Mr. Holmes, what would be your favorite memory? Like, what is your most memorable moment from being in Vietnam? Don't got one, let's move on.
We all have what we call short time calendars.
Gotcha.
And a short time calendar was a calendar where you start counting backwards. So on that calendar, the first day there was, it was 365. You mark off 365, and then the next day you mark off. And then when you got down to around, 2 days left, 3 days left, then things started changing, and your attitude started changing. And so the flight back probably was, wow. Mm-hmm. And each time, as far as I was concerned, each time it became a little more hairier. And so that after that third tour, I knew I wasn't going back, have to go back again. So being thankful to get through with relative most of my health.
Was it the same with you, Mr. Wiss?
Well, a little bit. That was a long time ago. But I've never done this before. I really talk about it like this, and the more I talk about it, the more I can think of things, and I could probably go on longer than this interview that you guys could do with it. The good things are probably I've got friends yet that I still keep in contact with from Vietnam. I suppose that is probably the big thing. I saw people grow up. I saw a man one time. The first time a round fired off. He hid under his poncho liner, and a poncho liner, it weighs about 6 ounces, and it's about this thin, and it's designed to heat. And then 2 months later, I saw him pull somebody out of a really, really dangerous situation, and should have got a medal for it and didn't. So I guess those kinds of the things. I mean, there's a lot of small incidences. We did some things that we're proud of, but I would say that having dealt with those people, and then obviously having gotten back with barely a scratch.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Finally, with you, Scott.
I've got the privilege to serve with and be in charge of a lot of great guys. But I think probably my most memorable one was when we were in Iraq. One of the things that would happen is when you'd leave the gate, whether it's on a foot patrol, most of the time on a mounted patrol in vehicles, as you're leaving, the kids would come up out of the nearby villages, and they would basically assault your vehicles. They'd be trying to take stuff off of water bottles, chains, all sorts of stuff. And for me, having kids, my biggest fear was that I had a 20-some-year-old driver that one of them 9-year-old kids was going to get underneath the tire and get hurt. So what I started doing before we'd leave, I'd take just pea gravel, not anything sharp or anything, but little round pea gravel, river rocks, and I'd throw them in a cup holder I'd made up in my truck. And as we'd roll out and they started running up the trucks, I'd kind of shotgun blast them with that. I just throw them at it, not to hurt them, just enough to persuade them to not be there. And this young Iraqi gentleman, he's had to be in his mid-20s, had seen us doing this. He knew what we were trying to do. We weren't trying to hurt the kids. We were trying to get them away from the truck so they didn't get hurt. One day he come out with a stick about 3 foot tall and about 2 inches around. And these weren't even his kids. I mean, there was probably 12-year-olds on down to 8-year-olds. And Babe Ruth would have been jealous of his swing. He lifted he hit these kids in the butt and lifted them off the ground and started chasing them across the fields. And as soon as the kids ran out in the fields, he just turned around, put his arm on a stick, looked at us, gave us a thumb up, said, "Love America, love America." Mm-hmm. And every day after that, he was standing outside that gate when a convoy would leave to make sure those kids didn't get on the trucks and get hurt. And I was like, that's awesome. That's a guy that he don't know us. He don't know most of these kids, and he can beat these other kids and feel perfectly fine about it. But it saves me having to worry about the kids getting hurt, and that was the biggest thing. And we had a couple little girls that would always watch us leave, and they were the most adorable things in the world. They were cross-eyed as sin. They could see the front and the back of the convoy at the same time is how bad they were, but they were just adorable. They always would ask us how we're doing. We'd give them little Pop-Tarts and stuff like that. The whole family was out there. It was great. They loved seeing us and knowing that we had some kind of an impact on them, that we were actually doing something and we're accomplishing something. That was the best part about it.
I want to start with you, Mr. Holmes, on this question. In coming home from the Vietnam War, did you have a different perspective or outlook on life?
Yes, I'm sure I appreciated it much more. Mm-hmm. And I have a sign in my classroom today that freedom is not free, and I really kind of learned that from my tours in Vietnam.
Right. Okay. You, Mr. Wiss, do you have the same?
A little different, I think. Probably the biggest thing that I got out of it, or change that I had, is I know any time in life I can do anything for a year now. I know. I don't care how bad things are, how uncomfortable things are. I know that I can go through the most miserable thing in the world for a year. I know I can do that because I did it, and I've used that a few times in my life. The other thing is I was a farm boy growing up, and we kind of hunted and did those kinds of things. I have no interest in killing anything since I got back in Vietnam. And I didn't even realize that I had that until an opportunity came. Doesn't bother me that other people like to hunt and do all those things. I just don't want to do it anymore.
Right. You, Scott?
For me, it changed my life in the fact that even though you may be in the worst of situations, everybody has small blessings. No matter how small they are, like financial issues, whatever. I've got my kids. My kids are great. My wife loves me most of the time. And I'm not an easy person to deal with, but it's the smallest blessings that I can go to the fridge and get a cold pop anytime I want and get food. It's there. It's just the little things. That's what became important.
Right.
Once, because we give up so much to go over there and do stuff. It's the little things here. We're like, wow, this is neat. Oh, I got this. This is cool. Like a little kid at Christmas.
Gotcha. And one big question here. What does Veterans Day mean to you? We'll start with Mr. Holmes.
It means a lot because there are a lot of brothers and sisters who have volunteered and went ahead of us. And so it's a time to honor those people who have served before you and who has set a standard of excellence. And sometimes I get upset that, again, I ask kids, what did you do? And they seem to think Veterans Day is a day off and don't really understand the overall meaning of what it's really about.
And you, Mr. Wiss, what do you think?
Can you ask the question again?
What is the meaning of Veterans Day to you?
Well, it's a little hard in some ways. I mean, I respect veterans. I respect these veterans. I respect that they're volunteer now, and much more than us. I wouldn't have gone if I hadn't been drafted to go. I wouldn't have gone to Canada. I went, but these people that join now, and I respect them, and I think they do a great job. Despite they have to go over there, despite the fact that they probably don't agree with a lot of it politically or any other way, and yet they go and they do the job. They don't complain, and we should all love them for it.
Awesome. Finally, you, Scott, what do you think about Veterans Day?
We will look at it. My family comes from a long line of military since the Revolution, and not always necessarily on the right side of the war. I've German heritage. I'm second generation German American. If that tells you anything. But we've got a proud history of serving our country or countries. And that, to me, Veterans Day is I get to recognize my family members that came before me, and also my brothers and sisters that chose to wear the uniform. I'm also heavily involved in the American Legion, so we do ceremonies, we retire flags on Veterans Day that are worn out. We have dinners for veterans, helping out the older veterans, the guys that aren't doing so well right now, the World War II guys and the Korean vets. I guess Veterans Day is still a day about service. Whether you're in the military or not, it's finding those people that are in the military and saying thanks.
Gotcha.
Do you have any more questions?
I think it's good. Thank you guys for coming today.
Thank you.